This video took much longer than my usual content, so if you enjoy this, please like and subscribe. Fontaine's Archon Quest Act 1 and Act 2 were exceptionally good. The way the quest was played out and how we as players interacted with it was well made. So today I will be discussing the main points of the Archon Quest, but I do recommend you do the quest before watching this video as it contains a lot of spoilers. I'm not going to go into every single detail of the quest, just main points, because this video would be too long if not. So if you want the full experience, I would again recommend you do the quest. With that out of the way, let's get started. Act 1. At the beginning of the quest, we meet Lyney and Lynette. They introduce themselves and seconds later, Fontaine makes her grand and dramatic entrance, giving us an interesting first impression and peek into her personality. Better yet, the persona she had made for herself please her people's want for drama. We are challenged to a duel by her royal dramaticness. Lyney got us out of that situation and later told us more about the prophecy that surrounds Fontaine. He says,
"Every person in Fontaine is born with sin. No matter how the nation of justice holds trial after trial, this sin cannot be absolved. Until one day, the water levels in Fontaine will rise, and the sinful people will slowly be drowned. In the end, the people will all be dissolved into the waters, and only the Hydro Archon will remain, weeping on her throne. Only then will the sins of the people of Fontaine be washed away."
This line will be referenced a few other times in the Archon Quest, and certain other world quests refer to it as well. After helping him distribute magic pockets to people in the event that their area is sunk, we see a blonde-haired girl stealing something. We try to catch her, but Lyney and Lynette claim that she escaped because Lyney twisted his ankle. A trained member of the Fatui twisted his ankle. How convenient. The reason I don't think it was a complete coincidence that she got away is because of this video. It does a better job of explaining the potential that it was all an elaborate plan by the twins. We then take a boat to the court of Fontaine, where we are reintroduced to Charlotte, who tells us about the missing girl's case. There isn't much information about it at the time, and Lyney also voices his opinion on wanting to catch the perpetrator. We arrive at the court of Fontaine and bid farewell to Charlotte. After getting off the aqua bus, we headed to Lyney's house and met Femine, who is the most introverted introvert in this game. He tells us about a legend he heard about the rain. It is said that Dragon of Water once resided in Fontaine. Though we do not know where the dragon went, every time it weeps, the skies will cloud up and pour out rain. When I was a child, my mother told me if I wanted to go outside and play, I should yell towards the sky at the top of my lungs, Hydro Dragon, don't cry." The Hydro Dragon is another one of the elemental dragons we've met. Whether it is one of the 7 sovereigns like Apep or not, we do not know. Also, so far Inazuma is the only one without an elemental dragon. Orobashi was a snake. They're both reptiles, but not the same thing. Anyways, back to the Archon Quest. We helped Lyney run one more errand to the blacksmith, where we met Child. He beats up some people who were disturbing our conversation, and then told us about his past in the Abyss. When he was 14, he fell into the Abyss and was trained by a woman named Skirk, who told him he had awakened it, and that traces of it remained on him. When asked what it was, he told us he didn't know, and that he'd been trying to find his master to question her ever since he left the Abyss. He also told us that he's having some problems with his hydrovision, so he gave it to us for safekeeping and went to fight Chlorinde. The next day we met Lynette at the fountain, where the traveler heard a voice calling out for someone named Vashir. We tried not to give it too much attention and went into the opera to see Lyney's performance. We were sat next to neuvillette, who Lyney introduced as the Chief of Justice, and the performance started. Lyney's performance was show-stopping and breathtaking. Quite literally, because someone died. During the last performance, Lyney's other assistant Cowell was killed by one of the props, and the girl that was supposed to be in the box for the magic trick disappeared. Neuvillette correlated this occurrence with the missing girl's case, and Lyney was suspected to be the murderer and perpetrator of the missing girl's case by Fontaine. Neuvillette asked if we plan on defending him, and that's how we became his attorney, which I have to say is just weird. Like, we don't have the qualifications to defend anyone, and we literally know 2 other lawyers, Yenfei and Kuki Shinobu. But anyways, we take on his case and got to solve him. While looking for clues, we met Navia, the leader of the Spina do Rosula, who offered her help and asked us to become her partners to help solve the case and clear Lyney and Lynette's name. We went under the stage and learned about how the switch performance was done. In the basement, we found more clues and an event which will come into play later. We discussed our findings with Navia, and after lunch we went our separate ways. The next day, the trial starts. Fontaine asks Lyney if he heard a thud. A thought everyone heard, by the way, to which he said he didn't. So she uses this as evidence against him. She also reveals that he and his sister are members of the Fatui, which was news to us. We asked the court to be adjourned so we could talk to our client and ask them to explain themselves. The traveler is understandably angry at the twins for hiding such information from him, but still decides to defend the twins as he does not want to see innocent people go to jail for crimes they didn't commit. The reason Lyney didn't hear the thud was because he was in the vent that we found earlier. He was in the vent because he wanted to see how the oratrice worked. So they made a tunnel towards the oratrice, and that vent was the leading tunnel. When he went into the vent, he heard a voice, so he went out. By the time he came back out, the girl had disappeared and he didn't see anything. We went back into the court and played our case. Now this part of the Archon Quest is what sold me. The Ace Attorney vibes were off the charts, and I heard others saying it had a similar vibe to another game called Danganronpa. It is a murder mystery game. Suffice to say, the argument part and defending part of the Archon Quest really involved the player, and we didn't just sit there reading dialogue, which was fun. After clearing up that Lyney could not have been the one to kidnap the girl and murder Cowell, we had to figure out who actually did it and where the girl is now. Using the clues we've gathered and process of elimination, we hypothesized that the girl was dissolved by a substance called the primordial sea, and we found tubes of it in Cowell's bag. We ended with the conclusion that Cowell was actually the one to dissolve the girl, and his death was only due to his own misstep, but also there was an accomplice. He couldn't have done this on his own. The guards were asked to check everyone's personal belongings, and empty vials, similar to those found in Cowell's bag, was found in Lyney's belongings. Fosler made her case, and we had no rebuttal. Lyney was the accomplice, and he had been caught. Unless Navia, being the queen that she is, comes to the rescue and gives us our final rebuttal. The girl who had supposedly been dissolved was found. Her name was Hazley, but not really. It was Lillian. She admitted that she was the one to kill Cowell. He tried to dissolve her with the primordial seawater, but since she's from Mondstadt and the water only worked on Fontainians, she wasn't dissolved. They had a fight, and she stuffed him into the box, where he was crushed and died. The vials that were found in Lyney's belongings were planted there by Cowell's accomplice, who then dissolved into water in front of our very eyes before he could tell us who he worked for. Neuvillette recounts the occurrence of the case for us in a proper manner. The twins were declared not guilty by the oratress. We had a little falling out with them because they hid the information about being a Tui, and that was the end of Act 1. Act 2. After solving the case, Navia invited us to a celebratory feast with her in Hotel de Boer. She tells us more about the Spina di Rosula and how their job is to help the people of Fontaine to investigate matters that the guards would not or have difficulty investigating. We tell her about wanting to meet Fossilars, and she gives us some legally questionable methods of doing so, like hiding under her bed and threatening not to let her go back to sleep until she answers our questions. We finished our meal with her and made our way back to the Opera of Fontaine to meet Fossilars, hopefully catching her during her break. When we approached the fountain, the traveler could hear the voice calling out for Vasher. This time, even Paimon could hear it. The traveler walked towards the fountain and seemingly fell into the water. When he woke up, there was an oceanid in front of him, asking about her love, Vasher. She had lost her memories and was no longer human. Perhaps she was one of the women who was dissolved. He tells the traveler to pass on a message to Vasher if they should ever meet. He should stop looking for her and that she didn't die in pain. Paimon's voice called out to us, and when we woke, we were being attacked by a horde of Gardamex. Navia and Clorinde fought them off, protecting the traveler. After the assault, Navia questioned why Clorinde was there, and she merely replied it was to protect her, as that was Navia's father's last wish that he left with Clorinde. Clorinde left, and Navia explained why she came to find us. Back in the hotel, Paimon had drank one of Navia's drinks and called it salty and icky, a drink that was supposed to be sweet. This made Navia realize the drink had been spiked with most probably primordial water to potentially dissolve her. Since the traveler and Paimon weren't from Fontaine, despite having their drinks spiked, they didn't dissolve. Rather, it just made them more sensitive to the hydro element and voices of those that had been dissolved by it. We share our conversation with the oceanid with Navia, and we followed her to her base in Poisson. At the base, which was located underground in the sewer areas, we learned that the Spina de Rosula used to have a much higher budget when Navia's father, Callus, was still alive, but when he was charged with the murder of a friend, he chose to fight to his death in a duel rather than have his case properly investigated. The duelist that he had died to was Clorinde, and he left her with the wish to protect Navia. Callus was investigating the missing girl's case when he was, in Navia's opinion, framed for murder and had his name soiled by the accusations. His choice to die in the duel didn't help his reputation either. We took some rest, and the next day we talked with Nadia about Bashir, theorizing he's probably very important to the case, but Navia couldn't find any information on him, so maybe he had been taken care of, if you know what I mean. We went to the Chief of Justice's office where all information on cases are kept, an archive of sorts. When we asked Neuvillette about the case, he offered to help, but he too couldn't find any information on a man named Bashir. As we were leaving, he tried and failed to comfort Navia about her father, which in turn caused her to lash out at him and said he didn't actually care and only said that because that's what he thinks he should say. She shouted at him for not stopping the duel and said he cared more about the law than human life. Sidetrack here. How Hoyoverse animated her crying was very well done. It's just tears, like it's just streams of water, but for the most part, when Genshin characters cry or are supposed to be crying, they don't actually cry, like there's no tears in their eyes. You can tell they're sad, but they don't cry. So the fact that she was actually crying with tears in her eyes, like tears rolling down her eyes, was a nice attention to detail, and I like that they did that. When we left the building, it was raining. It was also raining on the day that Callus supposedly murdered his friend. Now, with the information that people could turn into water, Navia theorized that someone must have killed Callus's friend and then dissolved into water, which was washed away by the rain, leaving only Callus and the dead friend at the scene. We returned back to Passant to the Spena de Rusula headquarters, which was a huge but broken ship. We find Millis and told him about our findings. Navia told us about a drink called Synth. It gave you a positive emotion when taken, can be addictive, and will cause anxiety and paranoia if stopped. Basically, withdrawal symptoms. Callus called for the ban of this drink and refused to be bribed. He even looked for the mastermind behind the production of Synth and found an informant who was the friend he supposedly killed. Clothes were found on the scene, so the theory that the actual assailant turned into water holds water. You get it? Millis warned Navia against continuing to look for the perpetrators, but she didn't take his advice and instead asked about more information on her father and what he was working on. Callus had wanted to find who was behind the Synth production and disappearance of the girls, but he chose to die because they planned on dissolving Navia next. So he found their base of operations. He found where their base of operations was and threatened to go public with it if Navia was harmed. He also had a life-threatening disease, so he didn't have much time left anyway. Millis told us the location of the Synth base and told us about who he thought the three main suspects might be, and another investigation was underway. We visited the dead man's wife and daughter, who had been under Passant's care ever since, and then investigated the three people that Millis suspected. While we were discussing our findings with Navia and deciding who out of the three suspects were most likely the culprit, we were informed that a certain harbinger that goes by the name Tartaglia, ring a bell, was being charged with being the culprit of the disappearance case, which by the way makes no sense to me. Like, the girls have been going missing for 20 years or so. I doubt Child is even 25. Hell, he would have to be over 30 or 40 to have been the one kidnapping the girls, and I'm pretty sure this is his first time in Fontaine, so I don't even know how he got accused to begin with. Probably his own fault, to be honest. Navia and Traveler agreed on Marcel, one of the culprits, being the main culprit. So Navia went to the opera to pin the blame on Marcel, while we went to the Synth base to find clues to prove that Marcel was in fact the culprit. Tartaglia admits he's being accused for something he's never heard of. He didn't seem to care because if he says the accusations are true, then he can duel with Chlorinde again, since she was holding out on him the last time they had a duel. Navia steps in and gives her prime suspect, Marcel. She retells the occurrence of the night, but this time with some clarity. There was a banquet. Callus went out of the building to meet Jacques, his friend. An assassin shot his friend and tried to shoot Callus, but Callus knocked them down and shot them instead. The assassin dissolved into water, which was washed away by the rain, leaving only a dead man and Callus holding the gun. Navia asked for a re-investigation, of which Fossilors, who was acting much more calm and mature this time around, agreed to. They investigated the clothes found at the scene. When asked why Callus didn't just tell the truth, Navia said he was afraid he wouldn't be believed, and that he was protecting her and intended to die in that duel. Chlorinde agreed with this statement. When Marcel was called to the stand, he almost immediately starts guilt-tripping her and also claims that he was not in Fontaine when the disappearance started, that he had been in Shnezhnaya. He seemed quite confident in himself until Navia mentioned the name Bashir, and he seemed flabbergasted. Meanwhile, the Traveler and Paimon searched for clues in the base. They found a lot of clues. They found a list of girls that were dissolved, a pool of what was probably primordial water, and a list of baby names in a journal. One of those names was Marcel. With conclusive evidence in hand, we rushed to the opera house, where the Traveler states that Marcel was actually Bashir this whole time. Marcel's lover was dissolved by the primordial water while they were adventuring, so he had been trying to find a way to bring her back by dissolving other women in hopes of finding out how to undo it. He had a full-blown meltdown and explained that no one believed him when he said his lover was dissolved, and that he even tried to be dissolved as well. He isn't from Fontaine, so it didn't work. The guards apprehended him, and neuvillette reviewed the evidence of the case. Marcel was deemed guilty by the oratress, and the serial disappearance case was closed. Since his trial started because of Child, the oratress had to place judgment on him too, as per Fontaine's laws, and it deemed him guilty. which Child was not very happy about. He tried to unleash Foul Legacy, but was quickly pacified by Neuvillette. We asked Neuvillette why Child was deemed guilty, and he said he didn't know. Neither did Focalor, but he promised to find out what was going on and clear Child of this charge if he indeed isn't guilty. While we were leaving, Marcel asked us to allow him to see his lover one last time, to which Neuvillette and the traveler agreed to. We brought him to the fountain. He went to the fountain and also saw the Oceanid, but it wasn't his lover. Rather, it was all the women he had drowned, cursing him for his selfishness and robbing them of their futures. His lover didn't want to see him, and the victims told him to drown. He died being hated by the woman he tried so selfishly to bring back. Days later, we met with Navia, who invited us to her father's memorial. When we got there, Neuvillette was also there. He apologized, and Navia told him he should learn more about understanding humans. They had a small talk about justice and how he was wrong about what humans hold dear most. He apologized again for not recognizing that sometimes justice isn't always clear-cut. Navia also apologizes for being mad at him and his struggles to understand certain things. They reconcile, and we also pay our respects to Kalos' grave. We later found Neuvillette standing alone, so we went up to ask him some questions since our luck with Focalor hasn't been all that productive. He told us about how they should start taking the prophecy more seriously and that the Hydro Archon has been working on figuring it out and that it might have been a problem left for her by the previous Hydro Archon. He also spoke about the primordial seawater, about how the seas now are completely different from the seas of back then, the seas of which all life emerged, but those waters no longer exist, and the one Vasher used was probably just a special case. Strange how the thing that created all life was now used to take it back. We asked about Child and our sibling. He talked a bit about the Oratrice and how it operated, but said he hadn't seen our sibling before. After our very informative conversation, he said he had to go back to work, and Paimon noticed that it stopped raining, and that was the end of Act 2. Final review. The Archon Quest was not what I was expecting. I was kind of expecting us being thrown in jail. Almost happened, but instead we had to defend people with 0 to no loyal skills, but it worked out. My favorite parts were the argument parts where we had to refute Focalor's statements. The clues collection process was also quite fun, and it made it more than just us reading dialogue and clicking space. It had my attention the whole time. Genshin has gotten much darker with its storytelling for this Archon Quest. We had murders, kidnappings, druggings, talking of addiction, and probably much more to come in the coming acts. I assume Act 3 and 4 will be about Child and the Oratrice, and maybe Act 5 will cover the prophecy and the Fatui's true intentions in Fontaine. But for just Act 1 and 2, I am satisfied about everything so far. I like this version of Genshin and the road they are headed on. I also like the fact that the Fontaine characters sort of have an accent. I enjoy how Navia talks. I don't know the actual accent, but her English VA did an amazing job bringing her to life. I'm sure the other VAs in other languages did well too. As a Zhongli enjoyer, Neuvillette gives me the same vibes as him, wise and calm. Though I think Zhongli might be more knowledgeable on human emotions, like the feeling of loss and grief in him, they both give me the same level of comfort. His care for the Melusines is reminiscent of Zhongli's care for the people of Liyue, and that just makes him so nice to me. Also, he is potentially the Hydro Dragon, so they're both dragons! Yay! If they meet, they would get along quite well. I don't think I have anything else to say since I have already done a review on the Archon Quest. I'll put it in the card above. You may go watch that after this. I hope you enjoyed the Archon Quest as much as I did. Comment your favorite moments or maybe even your least favorite moments. I would love to hear it all. Other than that, subscribe. See you whenever.